Hello, everybody. Good to have you back again, and hopefully, you had some relaxing and interesting Easter days. Enjoyed a bit your holiday, and today we are talking with Dani Weinstein about, or Weinstein, you will correct me, Danny,
About that.
um, yeah, about communities and the benefit of communities and where we can find some beef in that. Danny, I'm very grateful that you joined today. Today, we have the opportunity, as we are used to talk a lot, Thomas, myself, and our guest, that we switch it a bit, that our standard third person as a host is in New York, is challenging the bagels of the week, and actually having
No
um,
blueberry bagels.
well, I prefer he goes for some decent steaks and isn't enjoying honestly his time over there. And coming back to us, Danny, you have quite an interesting past, a long story when you are working or were working for HP, as I found in your track record.
Mhm.
And I'm curious how things are going on, and if you give us a brief introduction about yourself and your fable for communities, which is our topic today.
Sure. So Ralph and Thomas, pleasure to be here. I'm super excited, very grateful to have to be on your show. And yeah, let's jump into it. So for those who don't know me, Donnie Weinstein here, and I've been community leadership going back to probably the early part of 2008. And so again, my career path in community was not a direct line. After graduate school, I got hired by Hewlett Packard here in Northern California. I was a global product manager. I then went over to a startup that HP had acquired as a product line manager. Really dealt with, being that diplomat between the geeks in the lab that had technology and the customers who wanted, the experience. Came back over to more traditional HP and really spent most of my career at HP in the consumer support and services organization. So a very
Mhm.
massive global organization. I think when I left at the end of 2014, their annual budget for support was in excess of $1 billion. So if you think about all the printers and PCs in the world that are out there, tablets, phones for phone support, email support, chat support, remote control support. And so we won in the Americas a JD Power Award back in 2006 as best in class. And in 2007, they said, we're not going to renew it because you guys are missing a branded forum. They didn't even call it community. And so, HP had a lot of legacy homegrown communities built in the 90s on the enterprise side. So, IT professionals dealing with servers and storage and so on. And there were a handful of conversations there around some of the consumer products like desktop PCs, laptops, and inkjet printers. And so we had a charter. The business case really was, this is, how valuable is a JD Power Award? It was quite important. Again, HP's brand at that time was probably in the top 10 of the world. And so we had a charter to go build and create an HP support forum or community in multi-language. We went to IT and they told us, well, we're kind of busy now. It'll take us several years to build it for you. And we said, we can't wait. And so we got permission all the way up to Mark Hurd and went to the executive level because again, they were shutting down all shadow IT, got permission to go external. And at that time, this is again in 2007, late part of 07, the titans of enterprise SaaS or community SaaS was really Jive and Lithium. And so we vetted those two vendors and ended up going with Lithium. And again, we just frankly hit a grand slam. It was just, perfect storm. We had, again, thinking about the web traffic we had, and I was a part of that team that did the overhaul. We had support for maybe 26 languages at the time. I think today it's more than 30. But tremendous traffic going to our support websites. Obviously, HP.com had a lot of traffic. And so building out that whole experience, working closely with Lithium, we probably had the most aggressive launch from a volume perspective in English when we went live in the fall of 2008. And so I was on the original social care team. My core responsibility was around launching those 7 language communities. So we did English and French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, simplified Chinese, and Korean to serve our global audience. Ultimately, we had a team in Amsterdam that managed French and German, Sao Paulo for Spanish and Portuguese, and Singapore for simplified Chinese and Korean. And so we launched, had great volume, and because we became one of Lithium's top customers very quickly, we got access to some of their smartest people around community. So Joe Cothrell, who's a good friend of mine, who's Chief Community Officer, Brian Oblinger, who today is a very successful consultant, and many others, they really allowed us to really learn our basics about how do you manage and grow and scale community. And so, we did that. And by the time I left at the end of 2014, we had more than 2 million members in those communities. We were driving 100 million customers in traffic a year. We had cultivated several hundred super fans, and along the way, we won a couple of Groundswell Awards as best in class. The enterprise side of HP ended up retiring all the legacy homegrown communities and adopting the same model for themselves. So they built out another 7 lithium communities. And we even held 2 social support summits. And so if you think about community, it's, the way my analogy is, this is not something new that was simply created with the internet. These are conversations that our grandparents and prior to them even had, at the local barbecue, the dinner table. So for example, if you were going to, if you had a problem with your Mercedes, you weren't going to go call Mercedes to fix the car immediately. We're going to call your friend Ralph down the street who knows cars. Or if you had a problem with your Philips refrigerator, you're going to call your friend Susan, who's a trusted advisor on appliances. Mm-hmm. So having that, communal connection and trusted advice before going to, I got to call support again. That's essentially, and again, these conversations happen at the kids' soccer games, the baseball games, the community picnic, and so on. And so in the same manner, having the ability to crowdsource your customers and energize them around a conversation, around the topics. So in the case of HP, it was around Q&A, around, printers, PCs, and tablets, and so forth. But at the same time, creating a structure so that you gamify particularly the most passionate and active members. You've got to curate those super fans. They're typically the top 1%ers. And we were able to do that. And so in 2012, we had our first social support summit. And we flew in from around the world, about 170 people from around the world to San Francisco. We wined and dined them. They got to meet each other in person. They got to meet some of our top technical specialists from Notebook Land in Cupertino and in Houston, and the top inkjet and laserjet folks from Vancouver, Washington, and Boise, Idaho. Mm-hmm. And so, strengthening that relationship in-person meetup was fantastic. We did a second one a year later in Orlando with, I think, north of 350 attendees. And so really that window, that 7-year period at HP really gave me the foundation for, driving community value and leadership. And we were able to prove tens of millions of dollars of savings for HP on an annual basis. From there, I got recruited to Domo at the end of 2014, and they were a pre-IPO unicorn, very well funded. Their chief operating officer, Steve Wellen, understood the value of community, and they were very secretive. At that time, if you were a customer, you had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to actually license the software. They had no website, no marketing materials, but that was all changing. And so the day that I started at Domo, they literally announced the date for their first customer-facing conference called Domopalooza. And again, Domo is a SaaS vendor, serving data analysts, IT specialists that are reporting to a C-level executive. And so we had literally 9 days to stand up that community. And so I worked closely with Steve on strategy. We got more funding to get me a virtual team from Lithium. And we successfully had a kickoff at the conference to kick off the community. So I spent 5+ years at Domo. And again, with Domo, when you're talking in a B2B world, it's very different than a B2C world. B2C is typically home consumers, micro business. In a B2B world, it's one thing in the B2C world, again, they still want the recognition and the gamification element. In the B2B world, these IT professionals want to showcase their knowledge and community. And so they're answering questions, they're sharing best practices, they're speaking at user groups, and they want to be on the top leaderboards. But they also want that to showcase their knowledge, just like certification, to get promoted at their own job and or take a leap to another company. And so we saw a lot of that. Again, these personas around the data analysts at variety of brands, everything from Fidelity to Credit Suisse to Universal Studios. And again, connecting them together to they would figure out use cases or applications for our latest release faster than we could publish let's say notes on how to leverage the new features. And again, that's part of the fact that they're using the product probably more than some of our engineers were. And so the 5+ years there, we built that not just support deflection, but also A lot of great content was created to add to our knowledge base, to use as marketing use cases. But really the big one in a SaaS world was around adoption and having those advocates to help influence upsell and retention. Because in the SaaS model, it's all about how do you help maximize the chance that they're going to buy more and renew the following year or every 2 years, and also mitigate churn so that they're not going to a competitor. And so having those advocates was tremendous, because again, they were not only creating great content in the community, they were also influencing their peers. And then of course, as we started to do user groups, where I spoke at more than 30 Domo user meetups in North America in the last couple of years I was at Domo, we would ensure that, okay, we're going to Chicago, we're going to New York, we're going to Atlanta, who from communities there, who's a rock star, make sure they're on a panel, and make sure they're meeting other people locally, because they become influencers. And so we could actually build out a model which showed we had customer health scores, and at a very high level, accounts that had active members of the community versus those that were not were typically 3 points healthier and less at risk than those that had no activity in the community. So clearly it was a driver for revenue and upsell and retention. And then lastly, we were able to capture voice of customers. So having a place for engineering where customers could suggest ideas, vote them up, and develop a process so that you're serving up the most requested items to engineering to make the efficient use of their time, but also enable the engineering team to actually come back, provide timely updates on, all right, this is now submitted, it's now been reviewed, it's under consideration, it's been approved. And again, sometimes these things take several years, but the point is the customers don't want to go into a black hole. They want to feel like they're being heard. And this is, again, part of that customer relationship management. If you ignore them, that doesn't serve your brand. So really those 4 vectors: deflection, content creation, advocacy, and voice of customer were the core pillars around the valued community. And then, anyway, so during my time at Domo, we went public in June of 18, kind of rode the pre-IPO, IPO wave. And we fast forward to just prior to COVID, Domo had a challenging quarter and ended up not having not 1 but 2 rounds of layoffs. And so my boss and I were both let go on very short notice. And so I spent the summer of 2020 talking to many exciting brands, I think from more than 40 companies. And so in the end, I met Kaltura. They did not have a job for me when I met them. I ended up presenting to them the valued community, just like I'm talking with you guys now. I thought maybe I'll be hired as a consultant. And in the end, my future boss is like, I want to meet you one-on-one. We met. She's like, I think you'd be a great add to the team. I don't have a job. Let's get you in front of a general manager. Fast forward 2 months later, I have an offer from them, another nonprofit, and I went with Kaltura. So the last 15 months spent at Kaltura, coming in, presenting all the way up to the C-suite, getting 85% of my ask of budget approved, bringing on vendors, getting a beta stood up just prior to our IPO last summer, because again, Kaltura was also well-funded unicorn. And we did sort of a clubhouse model where we invited select customers into the community early. They felt sort of, they were special, and we worked with the CSM team to understand who those customers are. And once we got beyond the IPO, we then opened everything up in, the fall of 2021. Unfortunately, Kaltura had a speed bump at the very end of 2021, and also went through a round of layoffs. And so now I'm a free agent again, and I'm talking to a lot of exciting brands.
Where is your passion, as you are a passionate person, aside of building communities?
So my passion, and I think this is my secret sauce around community, is really connecting with people. I've always had that in my DNA. I mean, I've been working since I was 13. I had my own landscaping business as a kid. And all of my jobs have been, I've had a very strong customer-facing element. And even when I travel, if I'm going to New York or Amsterdam or wherever it may be, I'm always trying to see, all right, who do I know in that city that I can meet up with? Because it's not just about sitting in front of, sitting in a cubicle or sitting in a conference room and whiteboarding your strategy. It's also, I think, the benefit of, we're in a global world, and you don't get the opportunity to travel to all parts unknown. And so I thrive on that. So, really just, connecting with people. And even in other, like even when the Paul Greenberg show or these other groups that I'm a part of, if people are talking about, oh, I know somebody, or, they talk about, I'm looking to try to get a connection at this company, it's, oh, I actually know somebody, and, make the intro. So I thrive on that. And again, it's about that relationship. So even if going back to my HP days, those super fans today, I have quite a few of them still on Facebook. and we stay in touch. And again, those folks did not fit what I would call the Geek Squad profile. It's not some kid who's tinkering at Best Buy to fix computers. So I mean, the personas were just mind blowing. The top person in HP for desktop PCs in the world was a 64-year-old grandmother in South Carolina. Another guy who knew notebooks was an attorney in Indiana. Another guy is a retired military gentleman living, U.S. guy. He was at the Coast Guard, and he's married to a Dutch academic. He's living in Amsterdam, and he's a night owl. He's got like 6 or 7 HP products in his basement, and he's just tinkering with it all the time. And then they're like a 20-year-old kid in Poland who was just a Microsoft all-star as well as ours. So all these different personas. And then even again, meeting them up in our first meetup in San Francisco was just a trip. So I think it's about, at the end of the day, the relationship building is what I'm all about.
This is one part of what the community likely is. How would you define community?
Well, community is really, it's a collection of people that have the same or a similar common interest or passion about a particular topic. So if we're talking about a customer community, then it's a group of people that have some connection to that particular brand, either an owner of a product, and they could be that they're, just an average user. And again, most consumer behavior, or even not just consumer, most people's behavior is to go to Google and put a question in there and they find a result. And so having great content that is being driven by SEO is certainly going to help that. But then even beyond that, you've got this very small group that is incredibly passionate about the brand. They're very knowledgeable about the brand, and they want to be recognized for their activity and their knowledge. And they become a core part of the community. But really, the community is this common need, common interest, common yearning around a given topic or activity. And again, there's thousands and thousands of communities that are out there on different topics.
What are the main purposes, especially for online communities? So we had something. What I heard so far from you is, well, support is one of the obvious ones. There seems to be a bit of a training effect. So, what other main purposes do you see for companies setting up communities?
It's frankly become a requirement now, and I think we're finally hitting a heyday where a lot of brands are elevating the value community. And up until maybe 5 or 8 years ago, you would only see people at, let's say, a senior manager level. Now you have chief community officers, you've got VPs, you've got SVPs. But to your point, it's really about most people want to fix things themselves, or they want the information easily accessible at their fingertips, because everyone's time is precious. And so if you're able to set up an online community in particular about, a common issue or a common how-to or even a use case, that's in high demand. In addition to the fact that most people, regardless of what community is, they want to meet or connect with other people like them. So if I'm an IT analyst or a data analyst, using Domo, I want to meet other people like me. If I'm an IT administrator deploying Kaltura, it's the same thing. If I'm using an HP printer and I've got issues with the driver or with the ink or the paper gets jammed, the last thing they want to do is to go and open up a support ticket. The first thing is to go and Google it and see if they can fix it themselves, because then guess what? They get intrinsic value, like, oh wow, I did it on my own. So that's a big element.
Become a product hero.
And how about the companies? Also, I guess they want to see some value as well. They are surely not just setting up a community for the community's sake.
Oh yeah.
So
and
what
so again,
KPIs are they measuring?
The community's become really like this new horizontal. And so clearly, if you're creating great content, and Thomas asked the question, Ralph successfully answers it. Thomas has the ability to market as the accepted answer or the accepted solution, then those become gold nuggets within the community, because then you start measuring, okay, how many people viewed it? You can do surveying within the community. Okay, did you find the information you were looking for? Do you have intent to contact support? So there's very clear ways to measure support deflection. And so that's something that most C-level executives understand, especially the VP of support. Knowledge-based articles or even discussions around, doesn't have to be Q&A. It could be oh, I just figured out this new way to use our product, and you put it out there as a discussion, then you're enabling more people that are power users of your product to actually use it even further. And as most companies understand, the more that a customer is using a product, the stickier the product becomes. I mean, at Doma, we were measuring in customer health, how many times a day or week or month were customers logging in, because that told us how frequently they were using the product. And if we saw those numbers decline, that was a red flag that the account may be at risk of churn, again, particularly depending on the actual user. So if you're able to give customers the knowledge that they need to use your products better and more, then they're going to stick with you longer. So that's from a relationship perspective. Customers expect that. They expect to go to Google and search for information and find something there. And so then all those articles have value around, solutions that have been viewed or top discussions. They can be converted to knowledge-based articles. You're having the community essentially provide the raw content. So that's saving hours for technical writers who don't have to start from scratch. They can simply massage that content and say, all right, we don't have a knowledge article on this yet. Let's take that great solution and create an official article. So that's saving engineering hours to create that. But you also get value around the views of all of these different solutions. The advocacy piece, as I mentioned earlier, especially in a SaaS world, having those influencers out there to help drive upsell and retention, that can help identify quite a bit of dollars. And then lastly is around voice of customer. So again, in many cases with the engineering teams, customers have lots of different relationships. They know the account executive, they know the salesperson, they could submit a support ticket, they talk to their CSM. And so all these people are sending emails or opening a Jira ticket, and it's all one-to-one. It's going to engineering, and they're flooded. And someone's got to go in there and clean it up and figure out, all right, has this already been submitted? Well, if you have an ideas exchange and if it's managed properly, you can have it all in one place. You can have the same idea where customers can vote up that idea, they can comment on that idea, and then you propose to engineering, look, we can save you hours of reviewing these ideas simply by looking at it here, and we'll agree, we're only going to serve up to you guys you agree on criteria. My guys don't have time to look at all these ideas. Show me the ones that have 50 votes. But it's not just the votes. It's looking under the hood at, all right, is it the person who's screaming the loudest at the cab, your customer advisory board? I have to have it. Well, where's the context? I mean, is this customer spending, is it 20% of your revenue, or is it a fraction of a percent? Versus, okay, I have 50 customers here in community representing 30 logos with 10 million in ARR who want that idea. So now you have better data to serve up to engineering. And again, most companies are not going to do everything. You can go out to Microsoft and Tableau and look at ideas that have been out there for years and years with thousands of votes, and some of them have never been done. But the point is that you can at least manage that conversation and have it go viral across the bigger base. And that frees up bandwidth to the engineering team. It helps your CSM teams to focus on how to help the account versus, okay, I got to go chase down another feature from product. It helps with support because, again, even if you don't do a proper ideas exchange, I guarantee you in a customer community, 20+% of the conversations are ultimately going to be characterized as a feature request. I'm trying to do this. I can't do it. Can someone help me? Oh, we don't offer that yet. Go submit a feature request. So it's kind of this, cycle. And again, there's different mindsets around how to do that, but those are kind of the four vectors where value can be added. In addition to, again, even in the enterprise world now, when you're starting to do an RFP, there are quite a number of accounts that require, show me where your customers are. And so having an open community to view, that becomes a checklist item for your sales team, because it's not becoming a hurdle now for bidding on an RFP.
It's a cool opportunity for sandboxing in the way of I recruit a lot of the ideas out of the voice of my customers, which are chatting in a community about interesting things, how they could do it, and how on a hobby base somebody has tried to fiddle around, like I pimped my car or my printer or my laptop, I tuned it a bit, and such this becomes now a standard product. Yeah.
And not just that, as you start getting those 1%ers that are now ideation champions. They're contributing, suggesting 5 and 10 ideas a month or 50 a year. Guess what? Those folks become invaluable. Engineering now wants to fly them in to spend time with the engineering team. They want to pick their brain, because it's not just the guys in the lab figuring things out. You have a power customer that really knows the product inside and out, and is getting all this support, or I should say, accolades from the community, and saying, that's a great idea. I would love that. So, we saw a little bit of that at HP, where we had these conferences and then they were flown in after the fact. But even at Dome, we did the same thing. And so we kind of funneled those top members to become part of, our beta program. And it was quite a strong, again, it's about relationship building, getting people to talk to the right people, in your broader community.
Following 2006, this was also part of the secret sauce from Salesforce, such as when they started, that they collected a lot of ideas out of the community and they put them in a big box, still kept alive, but a bit more complicated. But Tom, I was...
there is this other word that sort of floats around, and which Ralph tangentially, oh my God, touched, and you as well, which is ecosystem. So where's the delimitation between ecosystem and community? Is there any?
So that's a great question, because again, you could look at with social media today and the internet. I mean, customers have the ability to start their own Facebook group, or they can start a conversation in Reddit or in Stack Overflow. So there are many different venues where this conversations can be happening.
Yeah.
And there's really two schools of thought. Okay, we're not going to own something. We're actually going to go out and be part of that there. The challenge is when it's an asset you don't own, you're handicapped. You don't have the customer data. You don't have the analytics, or you can sort of guesstimate what those look like. Or even, power users on Twitter, social listening. There's different ways to look at that. So again, having a hub, which is owned by your brand, that's something you can control. And it doesn't mean everyone's going to stay or only be there. But you can then selectively decide, all right, what are these other channels that are important for us to be listening to and even engaging to? And so, even at Kaltura, before I joined, one of the big verticals was higher education, and they had built out their own listserv community. It was 8 years old. I mean, it's this 1990s technology, and it was owned by Oregon State. And you had 400 administrators on there, and so some of those conversations were not the prettiest. They felt very comfortable, speaking their mind, but it became a great place for us to, promote, the new community and help onboard them. But again, the same is true whether it be in Discord or Stack Overflow or Facebook groups, Twitter, again, depending on the type of company, Instagram, Pinterest, all these things. You can't really boil the ocean. You got to start with, I think, a hub that if it makes sense, that you can own. And then, of course, as you're growing and scaling your teams, even HP, in the latter years, we expanded our social care team to address how do we listen successfully in Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. We were using Radiant 6 back in the early days, to do that and figure out, okay, where do we need to chime in? What should we promote on those channels? And how do we bring the relevant players over to the core community?
If one wants to measure the benefits between, for instance, an ecosystem and a community, are there different ones to measure? And what are benefits from your perspective?
So I would say that, the community at the end of the day are the assets that you are owning and driving. So if it's an online community or online forum, in addition to, user groups, but there's definitely a blending that goes beyond that to these other assets where, customers prefer to go. And in some cases, you may not be able to be everywhere. There's certainly some good tools that are out there for, for social listening. If it's the legacy Radiant 6, if it's, Chorus Care, they have a great, listening engine for social. It's really about how do you monitor sort of sentiment, and I think strategically chime in when needed to those particular channels. Because at the end, you want to keep or try to keep your core, on your major hub. And again, the metrics are the ones I kind of called out earlier. Those are the primary ones. But then, of course, you can build up modeling for, the volume of conversations you're listening to on various channels. And of those, depending on the sentiment, it's positive, negative, how many are you tackling and or addressing? Certainly if it's someone who's a detractor, I think you got to put context around, if we do anything with this particular comment, is it really going to change this person's mind or help them out, or they're just, they're going to go off on a tangent regardless. So, again, the community is a subset of the ecosystem, but you cannot ignore the ecosystem.
Now, if you want to build a community or nurture an existing community, revive a community, what are working strategies there?
Sure. So, and this was a very strong tip that Joe Cothrell preached, and it has stuck with me throughout the years, is you've got to start small. Even at HP, you cannot boil the ocean. You need to think about, okay, what are the most pressing conversations that are happening today? What are the big pain points of those conversations? And you talk to, again, the conversations are already happening somewhere. So you talk to the support team. What are the nature of the conversations that are happening? You talk to the CSMs. What are the nature of the conversations that are happening? You look at the ecosystem. Is there something that already exists that talks about the brand? And look at that. So from that, you want to build out sort of probably maybe no more than 2 or 3 personas of, all right, who is core to my community? Because you're not going to serve 10 or 20 personas, at least not in the early days. You've got to build on, all right, who are the most engaged? Is it, the IT analyst, data analyst for Domo? Is it a consumer user of my product at HP? Is it an IT administrator deploying video for Kaltura? That's clearly a very important persona. But then in addition to that, there's also, there are partners that the vendor typically has, especially in a SaaS world. They typically provide good input. And then, of course, you have the executive team, which they're typically less engaged in community, but some of them will actually follow conversations. And so understanding, how are they getting influenced to write more checks and to do renewals, it's very important you build up that relationship. So you start with those core personas, and then from that, you can then build out your strategy. Okay, this is how, and again, you have to all talk about, all right, is this going to be a support community? Is this going to be an advocacy community? Is it going to be, a product community where it starts with, the chief product officer? I'm talking into a lot of different brands right now, and it's kind of, one reports into marketing, one reports into support, one reports into the CPO, the chief product officer. And then there's others which it's more of an in-house, it's more like a consultant. There's a proliferation of communities that are happening with no broader strategy at the 35,000 foot level. And so, excuse me, they need somebody to come in to help be that sounding board and advisor for the internal teams to figure out what makes sense. And so again, if you're starting brand new, like I did with Domo and with, even with HP, HP, we had legacy communities on the enterprise side. There were a handful of these consumer boards, and we could see who the top players were. Like this, Cheryl, this grandmother in South Carolina, she was a rock star already on that board. We got permission to go talk to, 3 or 4 of them and said, hey, we want to give you early access. And so what you do is after you're sort of, you're starting to figure that piece out, you definitely want to incubate and have a beta or a dev window where you can work with a very small number of customers who are representative of a broader population to kind of, shape what the community is going to look like initially, and then have them start to, get those conversations going, and you build out content. And then after you validate it with that core group and even the internal team that's going to be part of that, you can then open it up to a broader audience. So certainly in the HP days we did that. I think we started with like 4. I'm trying to jog my memory here. We had I think 3 or 4 boards around printers, a couple around notebooks, and a couple around desktop PCs. And again, think about, you go to HP support website. It's like, it's like the Winchester Mystery House. You have thousands and thousands and thousands of SKUs and products.
Yeah.
And so products. Oh, we need one for this. We need one. No. we're boiling down to very broad conversations. What happens is, as you start to get volume in there, you're going to start to see new conversations evolving. And once you have critical mass with that new conversation, guess what? These platforms allow for you to, all right, we now have 50 conversations on this new, it could be 3D printing. Take those conversations, create a brand new 3D board. You move everything seamlessly to that new board, and that's how your customer has to drive the conversation, not necessarily what the product or the support team think we should have. Certainly want to take their input, but the key is to have small number of boards, high quality, nurture the conversation. As you start to see, okay, you're now hitting, the key metrics, then you can start opening it up and get more scale.
In how far is it a good way to have the moderation done by a customer or an advocate or some external person?
That's an evolution. So, early on, you want to have professional moderators. So we certainly use them at Lithium and Khoros in both the HP and the Doma days. And even in Kaltura, we brought on, we ended up going with Vanilla as a platform. We use Grazidi, who is a third-party vendor, and they provide services around developer design and moderation. So early days, you're going to have in-house or outsourced moderators. But as you scale the community and you've got that ranking structure, the gamification, you can then add more permissions in the flavor of a moderator or type of moderation permissions to your trusted customers. They have to first demonstrate that they have to earn they have to earn our trust. And so again, domo, domo means thanks in Japanese. It means, it's like domo arigato, is thank you very much. We ended up calling the community the dojo, like a martial arts studio. And the ranking structure we ended up, excuse me, you start out as a visitor, but then you earn a white belt and an orange belt. And I think the first couple of years we had all the way up to a blue belt. And the latter years we added several more all the way to a black belt. And so as I think they got to blue or higher, we started to add more permissions around, it could be things around moving posts or flagging conversations that need attention. It's certainly not going to be something for everybody, but at the end of the day, they become an extension of your team. And so it's very, very important. Also, they give you heads up to things that are happening that need the brand's attention.
In preparing for this evening's conversation or this day's conversation, just out of curiosity, where are you in the United States, Dani?
So I'm in the suburbs of Sacramento in a place called Granite Bay. I went to graduate school at University of California, Davis, which is about 40 minutes to the southwest of here. And then I got recruited by HP in Roseville, which is the next town over. And so they had once upon a time, they had 500-acre campus with, I think, 8,000 employees back in 2001. After all the changes and metamorphosis of HP, it's now split. There's no longer HP that's there, just HPE. And there's probably a skeleton crew of, I don't know, maybe 500 or 1,000 people that are remaining on that campus. So I'm kind of halfway between San Francisco and Lake Tahoe.
So from the time frame, this is round about 11 o'clock in the morning?
Same
Yeah,
as here.
10:39 a.m.
Okay.
Same as here. West Coast. Good weather.
We have evening here in Germany, and in preparing, I was just thinking about a lot of communities. For instance, what you described there is starting points in the early days of AOL. Then they had these user groups for special interests where you could ask everything and anything, and they started discussions. And I was wondering if one separates them into commercial and non-commercials. It's very interesting to see that there are, for instance, knowledge building communities such as Wikipedia.
Sure.
And I'm quite thrilled to see that if we see, even that it is driven commercially from a software vendor, that the trailblazers are a large community these days.
Oh yeah. So I mean, it's the Trailblazer community, and Erica Cool is a good friend of mine. She was the driving force behind the Salesforce Trailblazer community. She spent 17 years at Salesforce. Sort of a note of trivia here. She joined Salesforce back in the day as a Salesforce admin trainer, and she actually trained our friend John Tashik on Salesforce. So that kind of gives you context about the time frame. And it ultimately evolved into from an education discussion to slowly building out community, which again was, I think at one point they had lithium, they did other stuff, and ultimately they built their own homegrown thing. But that was an evolution over 17 years. And today she's a very successful consultant.
Yeah.
And clearly that's kind of gold standard. If you think about, the volume that's in there, all the golden hoodies, that's, those top.
Oh, now you're on mute.
Hoppala.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Now you're back, yeah.
People are changing their careers through the Trailblazer community.
Yeah.
And again, sort of analogous to moderation, it's not just the online events. How do you scale tens of thousands of user groups and meetups?
Yeah.
You can't do that with your employee base. You have to have customers that you trust to run them. And so, even the latter days of Domo, we were starting to do that. We'd go to Chicago. I had one of my black belts there. I said, okay, John here, Scott, we can only come to Chicago maybe twice a year. How about next month, you organize a meetup, same thing in Boston. And so, they met at a restaurant in Chicago. They did a Boston beer garden. And you helped them out with some money for food to get some swag. But at least it doesn't have to be 1,000 people. If you have 4 or 5 people coming and meeting up for coffee, for lunch once a month to continue that conversation, if they let us know about it, they post that in the community, guess what? We can then say, all right, we'll try to get a Domo salesperson there or CSM, somebody's local to just help facilitate or even take notes. Now the point is that's what Trailblazer has done. They've enabled this massive population to run in-person events. And again, that was a long evolution. And to Erica's credit, I mean, she was able to get. There's a great story which I'll send you guys a link later for you to share. But this is a video that she has where she talks about the story where Benioff is. I don't know if they were at Dreamforce or somewhere else, but I think it might have been Dreamforce, and they had a handful of the community stars up. This maybe 8 years ago. And it was very last minute. Like Benioff's admin told Erica, "Hey, we're going to get these on stage, and he may say hello to them." And so that ended up happening. And he said, "Well, who are you?" And they started to introduce themselves. And it was a bit of a rough conversation the first 5 or 10 seconds. And then it actually got into, he became keenly interested, like, holy cow, these people are brilliant. They love our product. And then after that event, he went to Eric and said, "Hey, I'm going to Boston next week. Find me more of these people." And so he got, that was a major success for her in getting executive buy-in. And today, if you go to Twitter, I think even this last week, he was in, I think in Australia, he met up with one of the top Trailblazer members. So you got to leverage that passion of those top members and let them, scale your user events. Then, of course, integrate that back into the online experience.
Now, good that you already said that Trailblazer is kind of the gold standard, or not kind of, cut off the kind of, they are the gold standard. Now, from your point of view as a community expert and expert in community building, there is surely something that even they can do better. If you were in a position to give them a tip, what would be the one or probably 2 tips that you would give them?
And Thomas, I'm sorry, I missed the first 10 seconds of your question.
Okay, the first 10 seconds were about me gloating about Trailblazer. So they are the gold standards. It's pretty much the best thing that is around right now, at least as far as I do see it, and I'm not a community expert. Still, what I do think is every setup can get improved. So if you now were asked to give them 1 tip, maybe 2, which were it, or was it?
Oh, for the Salesforce community?
Yeah, Trailblazers, yeah.
Well, I think it's like everything else. I think they're the victim of their own success. So I think having maybe an app or some better way to navigate the vastness of their communities. It's a combination probably of that and of search. there's always opportunity to improve that, so that again you're minimizing the effort to get from point A to point B for people coming in to look for either a specific conversation and or a specific event. So that would be my advice for Salesforce. But again, it's a very mature community, and that would be my key tip for them.
Is that quotable? I mean, it's out in the world right now. So if I would cut it out into a separate thing.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Will be done. Minute 45.
No, and there's other great examples of really strong communities. Atlassian has a fantastic community.
Who? Sorry?
Atlassian.
Atlassian. Okay, yeah.
They have they're one of the top communities. Alteryx is another gold standard. Tableau's got a very strong community. It's now owned by Salesforce. Again, think about all the Salesforce acquisitions. They're already a collection of existing communities that they acquired.
Yeah.
So that's kind of also where my thought is, that it's not just what was initially homegrown by Eric and team and Holly Holly Firestone. It's even beyond that now. And so there's thoughts around, okay, do we keep it separate? Do we have integrations? It's not a simple task to tackle.
They thought back in history, the starting point were not the social media communities, but more something like the cooperatives. The cooperatives, such as in agriculture, and where you had communities with a common interest, and they were either commercial or non-commercial driven. And from there is a certain starting point. If you see, for instance, clubs and their fans, it's a special community, a special interest community. And I see there's a lot of difference. And in these days, we have a lot of the social media communities for doing different purposes. In the old days, it were these alumni setups in universities and in further going sponsoring authorities. And I wanted to drive it from there to what is, for instance, the beef in a community like LinkedIn. Your perspective.
Sure. So, again, with my experience at Kaltura, they had a very strong presence in higher education, not just in the US, but also in Europe and Asia. And, the educators and the people supporting the ecosystem, they're very well connected. And so they really thrive on this kind of ecosystem. LinkedIn is also a, clearly it's a professional community. And I think that they've done a really good, my personal opinion is I think they've done a great job the last couple of years in particular in really improving their experience on one hand, so that you're actually getting better searchability and targeted content. That's the positive I would say about that. And then of course there are, dozens if not hundreds of different groups you potentially could join. I think that's a little bit more, more chaotic. But I think from a professional development and even just staying connected to, getting connected to other professionals in your space and even broadening your network, it's invaluable. At the same time, I think they've also allowed, how I would call it, I think they've let the technology allow for probably an unacceptable level of spamming. Within LinkedIn, those people that are paying for an email, or especially people that are not even taking a second to look at who you are and just sending you some nonsense or some random email. That's not part of a good experience. I think they've got work there to do on mitigating that, and maybe it's just putting in a buffer when someone's about to send an email. Then maybe they add another step saying, "Are you sure you want to send this note to this person?"
Is LinkedIn a community?
Sure.
What is then the difference between a network and a community? Sorry, probing question.
So I think that you have LinkedIn is facilitating you to manage a community of your peers that you are connected to. and that's allowing you to stay in touch to relevant, conversations. So certainly, if I'm connected to the Paul Greenberg ecosystem and his cast of thousands, like in the cover of Sgt. Pepper, that are all types of CRM, I'm going to see a lot of relevant CRM types of conversations in my feed. The same is true if I'm connected to the Holly Firestones and Erica Cools and Jonah Bacon's and the powerhouses of community consulting, Bill Johnson. Same kind of thing. I'm going to see. I know that when I go to LinkedIn, I'm going to see content that speaks to me. I'm interested in community. I'm interested in advocacy. I'm interested in following the overall customer relationship. And if you're not part of that connection or network, it really becomes that type of community. And it allows you also to generate conversations where you can tag. I can start a conversation and tag both of you to not only help the traffic of the post, but also get your, intentionally get your inputs to that conversation. And so in that regard, the common theme or need is, we're talking about CRM, we're talking about community, we're talking about advocacy.
Okay, so now one could say that in LinkedIn, the feed that you see is somehow curated by a machine with a big somehow, which is quite a black box. Yeah. So, and well, from let's say community aspects, or how I understand community aspects, I'd like to see a bit more relevant stuff. So how can that then be achieved?
So it certainly differs as it relates. Well, there's two elements. One, I think there's a commonality around SEO and the search engines that are crawling LinkedIn content. So coming in that way, I think is common to any online community. As it relates specifically to LinkedIn, I think it goes back to that earlier comment around understanding, who you are, who are you connected to, and what content really interests me. So the fact that they're permitting, somebody who has no clue who I am to talk about, an opportunity in manufacturing, which leverages none of my expertise for the particular question because he's trying to sell a widget. That kind of thing should be, they should be able to, mitigate that kind of thing. But from my experience, for the most part, at least in my daily feed, I find that at least 80% of the content is relevant for what I'm looking forward to from a conversation perspective and interest and potentially conversations to join. Is it perfect? No, there's opportunity for improvement.
Well, you're better off than I, so I'm not at 80%. Wouldn't it also be fairer to say that the LinkedIn groups are closer to community than, the general network?
I have a mixed view of the groups. I mean, some of them, yes, are definitely spot on, but there are others that have just sort of, proliferated, and I think they lost their meaning and intent of what they originally were trying to achieve. And so it's kind of broadened into a less relevant conversation.
I agree on the topic. If you make the comparison, for instance, to the German network or community Xing, then you see there's a lot more discipline in between what is added content, what is of benefit to the auditorium or the community. And they have quite a time-consuming, let's say, editing and conversation making before it's getting into the forum for the greater reading and discussion. So,
which ones? Who's they? They have better editing.
Xing, the moderator Xing.
Whenever there are moderated groups,
they have moderated groups there, and as I joined several of them, I see the difference between LinkedIn and there, and I found it quite positive that not such as the rules are followed. If you spam the group with commercials, you are cut off. Yeah. And if I want an exchange of ideas and I want an exchange of news and beneficial stuff for all in the group, then I prefer that it is non-commercial. Yeah.
Isn't that rather a trait of the particular group and not of this or the other network? Because on the just to put it on the value between Xing and LinkedIn, well, I consider one of them useless.
I know your opinion on that, but
No, but it's
I use a lot of means which are to some people useless, and for me they do have a benefit. So it depends on the user, and it depends on your target, and it depends on your personal goal. So
back to the main you said, what you basically say is that moderated groups are better than unmoderated.
I prefer them
Yeah,
because they keep away the gibberish, rubbish shit. Yeah.
which is pretty much available, I hope, in any community software that you moderate or not.
Well,
in most, but again, you've got ecosystems where we could debate all day the moderation standards of Twitter and Facebook and others, and even again, looking at the ecosystem, if it's Stack Overflow, if it's Reddit, there's different things that are in place.
The worst of all is probably HR. Whatever's close to the dark net. So, but what should be some reasonable standards that should be adhered to within a community besides, well, no harassment and the likes?
Well, I think there's several things. There's several key things, and clearly, as part of your launching an online branding community, you've got standards around rules of participation and conduct. They typically have to include, there's a heavy component of behavior, and keeping things civil and professional. That's one. Two, the ability to ban or suspend people's ability to post for one day a week or permanently. Lithium is really good at this. I mean, even back in the day when we first were developing or building out the developer environment, they had a pretty good spam filter. It was actually called the smut filter. And, we've all been around the block, but when you actually see this list of horrible words, that's hundreds and hundreds of words long, like, holy cow. So having that in place. But then even in the early days of HP, we didn't even have email to validation. We were letting people create accounts on the fly. And we suffered from that, I think, in year two or so. It wasn't just HP. I think Dell and Lenovo and others were facing a similar challenge. There are people in the world that don't necessarily like American brands. And they have professional spammers in some rogue parts of the world, like a contact center. And so they were creating bots. So they were using bots to create accounts by the minute and spamming our site with X-rated links. And we spent several months, having to mitigate this and worked with Lithium to develop a really strong spam filter. So you got to have that in place. And again, it's the community that you're managing is representing your experience and also the brand. So I think it's got to come back to what are you going to tolerate from a conversation? It doesn't mean that you're limiting free speech, but again, you want to minimize harassment. And I know we're running out of time, but we had we did Portuguese. Portuguese at the time was the number 3 language in the world in volume, and there was a 20-year-old kid who had his own little shop in Sao Paulo, and he was answering more questions than some of our top English members. I think they were separate communities, but his numbers were like rivaling some of the top people in English. But he didn't play well in the sandbox. He was harassing everybody else who was trying to answer questions. So we had one conversation with him, 2 and 3, and then we banned him for a day. Another conversation. We invited him to the HP office in Sao Paulo. We took him to lunch. I said, listen, you can't behave this way. And finally, after a long period of time, we banned him for life. And guess what happened? Our numbers took a big hit. And then 6 months later, all these people that couldn't speak up now showed up, and it was a much healthier community.
So how do you define community health as a closing statement? Because we are on top of the hour.
So there needs to be a consistent level of engagement in the community. So people asking questions or contributing to a conversation, that those should be growing over a period of time. Number one, the number of visitors is also very important, because again, not everybody. You have what they call the lurkers. It's probably 70% of the population. They're never going to comment. They just want to consume and read the information. So measuring your overall volume of page views and traffic coming to the community. But the big ones really are, those highly valuable the pieces of content. So accepted answers, best practice discussions, making sure that those are growing over time. In addition to everything else, that gives you a good element around the health of the community. It's like anything else. If people are not coming or showing up, then they're losing interest, and that's a sign that it's not sustaining itself. The more people are, new registrations, new logins, contributing content, those are signs of health.
Okay, that sounds like the perfect closing advice for up and starting community managers. Make sure that your community becomes and stays healthy with plenty of engagement. We at least had a little today, which is good.
That was fun.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us, Dani. It was highly interesting for me.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Ralph. Dankeschön.
Yeah.
You guys a good evening.
Yeah, well, so thanks for everybody who was online on the other side of the studio. And we are going backstage now. See you later.